In the dawn light of Judah, the golden dome of the temple gleams under the sun. This marks the first year of Hezekiah's reign, as recorded in 2 Chronicles 28. During his father Ahaz's rule, the kingdom of Judah plunged into profound darkness. Ahaz followed the evil practices of Israel's kings, not only crafting idols of Baal, but burning incense in the valley of Hinnom, even consuming his children. In fire, driving Judah far from the ways of the Lord. Yet Hezekiah's rise, like the first light before dawn, illuminated this idol-infested land. 2 Chronicles 29 recounts. Hezekiah ascended at 25, reigning in Jerusalem for 29 years. He followed all the ways of his ancestor David, doing what was right in the eyes of the Lord. In the first month of his reign, he reopened the doors of the Lord's temple and restored its sanctity, gathering priests and Levites, commanding them to purify themselves and cleanse the house of the Lord. 2 Chronicles 31 details. Hezekiah shattered sacred pillars, cut down Asherah poles, and demolished high places throughout Judah. Until every idol lay destroyed, he reinstated priestly divisions, revived sacrificial offerings, restoring proper worship in the temple. This was no mere ritual renewal, but a covenant relationship reborn, a healing between God and his people. Under his leadership, the nation turned back to Yahweh, filling the land with joy and praises. 2 Kings 18 testifies, Hezekiah held fast to the Lord, surpassing all kings of Judah before or after. He walked steadfastly in God's commands, given through Moses. Therefore, the Lord prospered his ways, bringing success wherever he turned. During his reign, Judah knew peace and prosperity. People dwelt in security. He fortified cities, stockpiled provisions, and strengthened military defenses. Yet such blessings drew covetous eyes from the looming Assyrian Empire in the north. A monumental trial approached, as shadows of conquest gathered on the horizon. 2 Kings Chapter 18 records, King Sargon II of Assyria dispatched a massive army to attack Samaria, capital of the northern kingdom of Israel. After 3 years of siege, Samaria fell. Israelites were exiled to Assyria. This news reached Jerusalem, causing widespread panic. The Assyrian Empire was the most powerful force of that era. From the Euphrates to the Nile, all lay under their dominion. They were notorious for brutality, leaving scorched earth wherever they marched. Their armies were exceptionally equipped and rigorously trained. Their chariots bore the sharpest weapons. Their archers mastered peerless skills. Where Assyria's iron heels trampled, no blade of grass remained. Their chariots swept like whirlwinds. Cavalry charged like tigers, unstoppable and undefeated wherever they advanced. Cities crumbled and people were enslaved. 2 Kings chapter 18 continues. In Hezekiah's 14th year, King Sennacherib of Assyria mobilized forces, capturing all fortified cities of Judah. As Assyrian troops advanced relentlessly, Hezekiah was forced to seek peace. He sent envoys to Lachish declaring, "I have done wrong, withdraw from me. Whatever you impose I will bear." The Assyrian king demanded 300 talents of silver and 30 talents of gold, an astronomical ransom equivalent to the kingdom's entire treasury. Hezekiah stripped all silver from Yahweh's temple and the royal treasuries, even scraped gold from temple doors and his own pillar coverings to pay the Assyrian king. Yet the conqueror remained unsatisfied. He reversed his stance, deploying his commander-in-chief, Chief Eunuch and Rabshakeh, with troops marching straight to Jerusalem's gates. 2 Chronicles chapter 32 records, Hezekiah saw Sennacherib coming, determined to attack Jerusalem. He consulted with officials and warriors. He ordered the blocking of all springs outside the city, repaired the broken sections of the wall, built watchtowers, produced large quantities of weapons and shields, appointed Military commanders to oversee the people made thorough defensive preparations, yet the situation remained critical. The Assyrian army outside loomed like storm clouds. Their tents stretched for miles. Their military might surpassed anything seen before. Their troops carried advanced weaponry. Chariots stood like forests. Soldiers wore full armor, grasping deadly weapons. Rabshakeh stood outside Jerusalem's walls by the aqueduct of the upper pool near where cloth was washed. He shouted loudly to those on the ramparts. His voice pierced through the city walls, echoing through streets and alleys. The people and officials stood on the walls, watching this Assyrian delegation. Anxiety marked every face. Tension and fear filled the air. This was the greatest crisis Jerusalem had ever faced. A test of faith and national survival was about to begin. 2 Kings chapter 18 describes, Rabshakeh stood below the city walls, shouting in the Judean language. His voice dripped with mockery and contempt. His manner was arrogant and disrespectful. His posture brimmed with insolence. Take this message to Hezekiah. Thus says the great king of Assyria, what confidence is this you claim to possess? You speak of battle strategy and strength, but these are empty words. Who are you trusting that you rebel against me? Look now. If you rely on Egypt, that splintered reed of a staff, anyone who leans on it will have their hand pierced. Pharaoh, king of Egypt, proves useless to all who depend on him. His words struck like swords, exposing Jerusalem's vulnerability, for Hezekiah had indeed sought Egypt's aid. This accusation unsettled every heart on the walls. 2 Kings chapter 18 further records. Rabshakeh continued speaking. If you say we rely on the Lord our God, did not Hezekiah remove God's high places and altars? He told Judah and Jerusalem, you must worship before this altar. Is this not rebellion against your own God? Rabshakeh twisted truth and falsehood, portraying Hezekiah's righteous removal of idols as sinful acts offending God. These words caused some people to waver. They began doubting whether Hezekiah's reforms were correct. With cunning words he shook the people's faith, saying, now give pledges to my master, the king of Assyria. I will give you 2,000 horses. See if you can find riders for them. If you cannot, how will you repel even the least of my master's captains? These words overflowed with contempt for Judah, revealing Assyria's imperial arrogance. His words struck like poisoned arrows, piercing the people's hearts. Some began whispering among themselves. Others showed fear on their faces, seeing the city wall's defenders remain unmoved. Rabshakeh raised his voice fiercely. Have I not come against this land by the Lord's command to destroy it? The Lord himself said to me, go up against this land and destroy it. This was ultimate blasphemy. He dared speak these profanities, falsely invoking the Lord's name. Priests and Levites on the walls burned with anger, but obeying Hezekiah's command, they kept silent. Eliakim, Shebna, and Joe said to Rabshakeh, please speak Aramaic to your servants, for we understand it. Do not speak Judean, lest the people on the wall hear. They feared these words would weaken popular resolve. Yet Rabshakeh deliberately raised his voice, shouting in Judean, was I sent only to speak to your master and you? Am I not speaking to those sitting on the wall, who will soon eat their own dung and drink their own urine with you? His words grew increasingly brazen, without restraint. His voice echoed across the city walls, filling all hearers with terror. 2 Kings chapter 18 records. He stood and shouted in the language of Judah, listen to the words of the great king of Assyria. Do not let Hezekiah deceive you, for he cannot deliver you. Do not listen to Hezekiah when he urges you to trust in the Lord, saying the Lord will surely deliver us. This city will not be given into the hand of the Assyrian king. He sought to shake the people's faith in God and break their will to resist. Yet the people on the wall remained silent. As Hezekiah had commanded, not a word came from their lips. Their silence revealed their trust in God and their king. This was a spiritual battle concerning faith. Every word from Rabshakeh aimed to destroy the people's reliance on God. But God's people resisted. These blasphemies through silence, their faith endured testing. When these arrogant words reached Hezekiah, the God-fearing king was deeply troubled, yet he refused to be overcome by fear. Instead, he brought everything before God. 2 Kings chapter 19 continues. When King Hezekiah heard Rabshakeh's words, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and went into the temple of the Lord before the most holy place. He lay prostrate on the ground. This was a king's most humble posture and the truest expression of a God-trusting heart. His tears soaked the ground, his soul poured out before the Almighty. He sent his palace administrator Eliakim, his secretary Shebna, and the leading priests, all wearing sackcloth, to Isaiah son of Amoz the prophet. These high officials humbled themselves, standing. With their king before God, they delivered Hezekiah's message. Today is a day of distress, of rebuke, and of disgrace, like when a child comes to the birth canal. But there is no strength to deliver. What a vivid description, capturing their desperate situation. They had reached their limit with no human solution. Perhaps the Lord your God will hear all the words Rabshakeh spoke, which his master the king of Assyria sent to mock the living God. May the Lord your God rebuke him. Therefore pray for the remnant that still survives. Hezekiah knew with certainty in this crisis, only God could save. His heart clung completely to the Lord. Soon after, the king of Assyria sent messengers to Hezekiah saying, "Do not let the God you trust deceive you, promising Jerusalem will not fall too. Assyria, have you heard what Assyrian kings did to nations, utterly destroying them? Will you be any different? Where are the kings of Gazan, of Haran, and Rezeph? Their nations perished." Sennacherib's letter pierced Hezekiah's heart like a sword. These words brought deep anguish. Yet instead of crushing him, they drove him closer to God. 2 Kings chapter 19 records. Hezekiah received the letter from the messengers, read it thoroughly, then went up to the house of the Lord, spread the letter out before the Lord. What an extraordinary act of faith. He knew God would hear his prayer. Kneeling before the Lord, he prayed, "O Lord God of Israel, enthroned between the cherubim, you alone are God over all kingdoms, creator of heaven and earth." He first acknowledged God's sovereignty, proclaimed the Almighty's power. Lord, incline your ear. Lord, open your eyes. Hear Sennacherib's insults against the living God. His prayer carried urgency, yet overflowed with conviction. Lord, Assyrian kings destroyed nations, cast their gods into fire, for they were mere human creations, wood and stone idols, therefore rightly destroyed. In prayer he distinguished truth from lies, testified to God's authenticity. Now, O Lord our God, deliver us from Assyria's grasp. Let all kingdoms know, you alone, Lord our God. He sought God's intervention to reveal divine power globally. This was faith-filled prayer. Hezekiah brought crisis before God, acknowledged divine authority, trusted in promised salvation. His confidence rested not in self, but God's faithfulness and might. In despair he still hoped. In crisis he chose trust. His prayer moved God's heart. Divine response would surely come. 2 Kings chapter 19 records. Isaiah son of Amoz sent messengers to Hezekiah saying, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, declares, because you prayed to me concerning Sennacherib king of Assyria. I have heard you. The Lord never delays. He responds to his people at the perfect time. This is the word of the Lord concerning the king of Assyria. The virgin daughter of Zion despises you. She mocks you. The daughter of Jerusalem tosses her head as you flee. God will put the arrogant Assyrian king to shame. Who have you reviled and blasphemed? Whom did you raise your voice against, and lifted your eyes in pride? It is against the Holy One of Israel. God will make the Assyrian king understand exactly who he has challenged. Through your messengers you insulted the Lord. Boasting, with my many chariots I ascended mountain heights, to the remotest heights of Lebanon. I cut down its tallest cedars and finest junipers. I reached its farthest outposts and penetrated its densest forests. I dug wells in foreign lands and dried up all Egypt's streams with my feet. Such words expose Assyria's delusions of grandeur, believing themselves all-powerful and free to act without consequence. Through Isaiah's prophecy, God exposed the Assyrian king's madness. Have you not heard how I determined this long ago? From ancient times I planned it, now I bring it to pass through you, making fortified cities crumble into heaps there. Inhabitants powerless, overwhelmed with shame. They became like grass in the field, like tender green shoots, like grass sprouting on rooftops. Withered before reaching maturity, God made the Assyrian king realize he was but a mere instrument in God's hand. All things remain under divine control. You sit down, you go out, you come in. Your rage against me, I see it all, because your fury against me and your arrogant words have reached my ears. I will put my hook in your nose, my bit in your mouth, and make you return the way you came. God reduced the Assyrian king to a tamed beast, forced to follow divine direction. The Lord's words carry absolute authority and power. He will judge Assyria's arrogance. This stands as God's warning to enemies and comfort to his faithful people too. Chronicles 32 records, Isaiah spoke again to Hezekiah. Thus says the Lord, I will defend this city for my own sake and my servant David's sake, to deliver it from the hand of the Assyrian king. This was God's promise to Jerusalem. He would guard the city himself for the honor of his name, and for his servant David's covenant, the Lord declared to all nations. He remains faithful to his covenant. A God of steadfast love and power. 2 Kings 19 continues, Isaiah gave this sign to Hezekiah, listen, O king. This year you eat what grows wild. Next year what springs up voluntarily. In the third year, sow and reap, plant vineyards, enjoy their fruit. This sign confirmed God's deliverance, restoring peace and abundance, not merely rescuing from enemies, but blessing with overflowing provision. The surviving remnant of Judah will take root downward, bear fruit upward. A remnant shall go out from Jerusalem. Survivors from Mount Zion. The zeal of the Lord of hosts accomplishes this. This prophecy reached beyond that era, pointing to God's eternal kingdom, his promise anchored in present reality, yet stretching to future fulfillment. Thus the Lord decreed concerning Assyria, he shall not enter this city, shoot no arrow here, raise no shield against it, build no siege ramp. God would frustrate every strategy. The invader's path becomes his retreat. He shall not approach these walls, declares the Lord Almighty. Divine words carried supreme authority. The city stood under heaven's protection, for God's glory, for David's covenant, an eternal promise shining through ages. To all nations God demonstrated he alone is true God, covenant-keeping, all-powerful, unfailing in salvation. This became Jerusalem's assurance, a proclamation brimming with power, hope anchored in heaven's faithfulness. 2 Kings 19 records, that night the angel of the Lord went out and struck down 185,000 men in the Assyrian camp. What an awe-inspiring miracle! God's messenger moved in complete silence, yet brought such overwhelming destruction. At dawn people arose. Jerusalem's watchmen climbed the city walls. In the morning light they witnessed an astonishing sight. The Assyrian camp that had roared with threats yesterday now lay in eerie stillness. No clash of weapons, no battle cries, only the whisper of wind through empty tents. Everywhere lay fallen soldiers. Not one remained standing, with just one Angel God defeated this seemingly invincible army. Jerusalem's inhabitants witnessed that divine power surpasses all human understanding. 2 Chronicles 32 recounts, the Lord sent an angel who annihilated all mighty warriors in the Assyrian camp, commanders and officers alike. None escaped divine judgment. The Assyrian king returned home in disgrace, fulfilling God's word spoken through Isaiah. By the same route he came, he would return, never entering this city. God's words never fail. His promises remain unshaken. This greatly strengthened the people's faith. King Sennacherib withdrew from Jerusalem, returning to his capital Nineveh. His pride shattered, his arrogance crushed by God on a dark, stormy night while worshipping in his pagan temple. His own sons Adramelech and Sharezer assassinated him, then fled to Ararat, thus fulfilling God's decree. He would not enter the city, nor shoot arrows there, not raise shields against its walls, nor build siege works, declares the Lord. How righteous is God's judgment. The boastful Assyrian king died before his worthless idols, murdered by his offspring. What ironic justice! Let all nations heed the terrifying consequence of defying God. 2 Kings chapter 19 records, after these events, the entire city of Jerusalem rejoiced. The people praised God's mighty power. They witnessed God's salvation firsthand. Jerusalem regained its peace. Hezekiah and all Judah enjoyed the rest God provided. God's promises were completely fulfilled. He not only protected the city, but also poured out abundant blessings, as the Lord had declared. This year you will eat what grows by itself. Next year what springs from that. In the 3rd year sow and reap, plant vineyards and eat their fruit. All this came to pass. Fields were cultivated again. Vineyards bore fruit once more. The surviving remnant of Judah took root downward and bore fruit upward. Through this experience, the people deepened their knowledge of God. Jerusalem's inhabitants witnessed God as faithful and almighty, a covenant-keeping God of mercy. He revealed his power in crisis, demonstrated faithfulness in despair. The miraculous night proclaimed to all nations, the Lord alone is true God, sovereign over all creation. He humbles the arrogant, exalts the humble, protects those who trust him, strikes down his blasphemers. Such are God's works. Awesome end. Wondrous. Hezekiah's story shows where human strength ends, God's power begins. Hope remains in hopelessness. When Assyria's army besieged them in desperate circumstances, Hezekiah chose to seek God. He tore his clothes, covered himself in sackcloth, prostrated before the holy place, spread the threatening letter before God, cast all burdens upon the Lord. Such faith moved God's heart. The Almighty fought for him in a single night. 185,000 Assyrian soldiers perished. This miracle reveals God hears prayers, remains faithful, and acts with mighty power. When facing trials, do not fear, do not despair. Follow Hezekiah's example. Approach God with faith and trust your burdens to him. God will sustain, God will protect. This account also warns, pride comes before destruction, arrogance precedes a fall. The Assyrian king's fate proves, God resists the proud, gives grace to the humble. Therefore stay humble. Rely on heaven's creator in this challenging age. Emulate Hezekiah's faith in times of crisis. Fix your eyes on God amidst difficulties. Hold firmly to faith. For God remains unchanging, yesterday, today, and forever. He guards his people, protects those who trust him. This is Hezekiah's testimony, our enduring reminder and encouragement.